Do you think if I were to leave the microphone down and just speak to it like this, would pick it up?
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thank you for joining us for the next event. Today, creation and dissemination of disinformation in social and traditional media. Just to help situate you, if you're just joining us, we are streaming to YouTube and we are live from Fourth Space, located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. And we're running this event as a live stream Zoom meeting, so of course we welcome comments and questions in the chat. Those of you in the space probably know already. Just raise your hand, we'll get a microphone over to you for questions. That's my pleasure to hand it over to Professor Classics, Modern Languages, Linguistics, Bradley Nelson. Brad.
Thanks, Doug. I can hear that I'm on, so we're good to go. Yeah, so I'm really excited to be chairing this panel. Like I said, we've been working on this event for quite some time. It's actually been a very intense last week with disinformation and AI because Vivek Venkatesh and I had been invited last week to SUNY Buffalo to speak to the group there working out of the Center for Information Integrity, co-chaired by one of our speakers today, David Castillo. And we had a lovely couple of days sharing all kinds of ideas, dreaming about future projects. And we're back together today, David and I, once again. Full disclosure, we went to graduate school together many years ago, and we've been collaborating on many projects through the years, a lot of collected volumes. One that's about to come out in the spring titled Anti-Disinformation Pedagogies. And then there's a subtitle, but we haven't really agreed what the subtitle is going to be. But David Castillo, we have three speakers. I'm going to introduce each one of them before they speak. I've asked them to give short presentations so that we can have more time to talk and ask questions and get a lively discussion going in this session. David Castillo is professor of Spanish and co-director of the Center for Information Integrity at the University of Buffalo, where he served as chair of the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures from 2009 to 2015, and Humanities Institute director from 2016 to 2022. He is a 2018 recipient of the UB Exceptional Scholar Award for Sustained Achievement and a 2001 recipient of the University of Oregon Ersted Award for Distinguished Teaching. He is the author of Undeceptions, Cervantine Strategies for the Disinformation Age, Baroque Horrors, Roots of the Fantastic in the Age of Curiosities, and Awry Views, Anamorphosis, Cervantes, and the Early Picaresque, and co-author, most recently, of What Would Cervantes Do? Navigating Post-Truth with Spanish Baroque Literature. And before that, with William Eggington, both of these, Medialogies, Reading Reality in the Age of Inflationary Media, and Zombie Talk, Culture, History, Politics. He has co-edited several essay collections, including Continental Theory Buffalo, Transatlantic Crossroads of a Critical Insurrection, Reason and Its Others, Italy, Spain, and the New World, Spectacle and Topophilia, Reading Early and Postmodern Hispanic Cultures and Writing in the End Times, and Apocalyptic Imagination in the Hispanic World. David?
Thank you so much. I want to, can you all hear me? Is it on? Do I need to pick it up? All right, that's a problem. So first I want to thank Brad, Vivek, and the rest of the organizers for their, visionary conference. This is, I can't think of anything more urgent in our world than dealing with disinformation. It touches on absolutely everything. You want to deal with climate change, you have to go through disinformation. You want to deal with public health, you have to go through disinformation. You got to deal with the crisis of democracy, you got to go through disinformation. So thank you, and thank you to the funders, thank you to the team for putting this together. So I thought I'd start with something in writing, because otherwise I'll be speaking forever, and that's not good for anybody. So I just want to talk a little bit, and I think much of what I have to say will resonate with Victoria's presentation a great deal. Starting with the deterioration of our information environment in the current age of inflationary media, which has precipitated what we've been calling a crisis of reality. Any sort of baseline for what we take to be facts no longer exists. Evidence-based information is routinely drowned in a media market that rewards the loudest and most strident voices at the expense of truth and the common good. The powerful AIs employed by social media giants have been trained to generate the most engagement from global users with little or no regard for information integrity, including in vital areas of public interest. What industry insiders called a little while ago personalized amplification is an AI-driven efficiency model that uses our own biases as hooks to keep us glued to the screen. We can curate our world through a combination of artificially augmented reality, promoting media feeds that reinforce our beliefs, and diminished reality, limiting exposure to inconvenient information that may call those beliefs into question. In other words, reality itself has become a consumer good, a product to be bought and sold in the marketplace. The result has been a deadly devolution of the language of democracy. As historian Yuval Harari and former tech industry insiders Tristan Harris and Asa Raskin warned at the time that generative AI entered the media market with a boom, the specter of being trapped in a world of illusions has haunted humankind much longer than the specter of AI. Soon we will finally come face to face with Descartes' demon, with Plato's cave, with the Buddhist Maya. A curtain of illusions could descend over the whole of humanity, and we might never again be able to tear the curtain away, or even realize it is there. Democracy is a conversation. Conversation relies on language, and when language itself is hacked, the conversation breaks down and democracy becomes untenable. That's the quote. As Yvonne Q, the company behind the release of ChatGPT, has since been looking into developing new features that will presumably allow users to customize their version of the technology based on their personal AI values and political orientation, even as their own developers realize that such tools are likely to result in sycophantic, and I'm quoting now internal company members, sycophantic AIs that mindlessly amplify people's existing beliefs. Is there a solution to this infocalypse, as Nina Schick called it in her prescient 2021 book on deepfakes? The fabrication and manipulation of digital media content is not a new phenomenon, but the astronomical sophistication of AI technologies has made it easier and cheaper to create good quality deepfakes in large quantities. Generative AI, such as ChatGPT, Bard, Palm, ImageGPT, DALL-E, Prime Voice AI, can produce highly realistic text, voices, images, and videos so convincing that even experts have difficulty determining their origin and authenticity. With elections looming for half of the Earth's population, we must recognize the threat and do everything we can to raise awareness and mitigate risks. As an example, at the University of Buffalo, SUNY Buffalo, we have developed learning tools in the form of mobile games. I've displayed a few of these mobile cards over there that you can grab, and they'll take you to the app. These are mobile games to help people 60 and older understand the myriad of scams and disinformation that target them disproportionately. We call it DART, Deception Awareness and Resilience Training. We've also provided an open platform for journalists, law enforcement investigators, and the general public for deepfake detection, attribution, and provenance. At the same time, and you can find this in our website, Center for Information Integrity at SUNY Buffalo. At the same time, we recognize that additional efforts and resources are needed to spearhead educational projects and community conversations. Just as importantly, we need market reforms to change the incentive structures of our media economy. As social media companies continue to profit from sensationalist, emotionally charged, divisive, and polarizing content, which often includes misleading and inauthentic images and video and audio. These companies are unlikely to make meaningful adjustments to their business practices without the right kind of combination of incentives and disincentives. Democratic societies must figure out how to promote and reward proactive action and discourage not just individual misbehavior, but self-interested corporate inaction. While red flagging initiatives are clearly important and necessary, the availability of cheap, highly sophisticated generative AI technologies makes it increasingly difficult to stay ahead of scammers and cynical opportunists, let alone deal effectively with disinformation campaigns run by demagogues in what seems like an unending game of whack-a-mole. This is why, as I see it, the real game changers are not going to come from debunking technologies alone, but from proactive pre-banking training, the kind of reality literacy approach that the humanities can provide. This is the recognition that inspired much of my public humanities activism as UB Humanities Institute Director and founding co-director of the UB Center for Information Integrity, including targeted community conversations, collaborative publications, and editorial projects, starting with the book that Brad mentioned, Medialogies, Reading Reality in the Age of Inflationary Media, which I published in 2016 with William Egginton, and continuing with the editorial project Humanities to the Rescue, a book series that I founded in 2018 in collaboration with SUNY Press. Full disclosure, I am a Cervantes specialist, like Brad, who looks at the toxic effects of mis- and disinformation from the vantage point. Sorry, gotta go back to the, all right. So yeah, I look at it from the vantage point of an earlier age of inflationary media, which caused a similar crisis of reality back in the early modern period, with all kinds of fake and manipulative news circulating in printed form, including state-sponsored disinformation campaigns. In Imperial Spain, for example, the monarchy supported what they call a royal chronicler office, tasked with the rewriting of history from a properly Catholic, patriotic, monarchical perspective to justify policies that discriminated against and ultimately criminalized religious and cultural minorities, including new Christians of Muslim and Jewish heritage. The new disinformation-filled monarchical histories and the conspiracy theories spread by yellow journalism at the time would play a crucial role in fomenting discriminatory practices and justify mass deportations, including the expulsion of more than 300,000 Moriscos between 1609 and 1614, known at the time as the final solution. Cervantes would include poignant references to the Morisco mass exile in Don Quixote II and Persiles, and would ridicule the ideology of racial purity that led to discriminatory policies against Jewish converts in his short theatrical piece, El Retablo de las Maravillas, the Wondrous Tableau. His ironizing strategy would be familiar to fans of the Borat films and the Colbert Report, consisting of nearly mimetic repetitions of xenophobic and racist language with just the right kind of modulation to reveal its nonsense. More generally, Cervantes' writings offer a model of humanistic pedagogy and activism that teaches us to press the pause button, to examine not just the content, but the form of manipulative messages in their multi-layered contexts. If a central goal of the humanities classroom is to help students read critically and think outside the box, the key Cervantine lesson is that in order to think outside the box, we have to see the box first. This is a central goal of two of my recent collaborative projects, the essay collections Anti-Disinformation Pedagogies, which I have co-edited with my brilliant friend here, Brad Nelson, and Truth Seeking in our Age of Misinformation Overload, a collaboration between the UB Humanities Institute and the Center for Information Integrity in which we rehearse a convergence approach to the existential challenge of mis- and disinformation with a focus on understanding the role of artificial intelligence as an accelerant and the need to cultivate critical awareness and develop more effective strategies of science communication in such vital areas as public health and climate change to build trust in collaboration with local community partners. With so much pressure building on humanists to defend themselves and explain the value of their disciplines in utilitarian terms narrowly defined by the incentive structures of the market society, it is important to remember that the question most worth asking is not what can our communities do to help the humanities, but what can the humanities do to help our communities? In the current media market, dominated by attention merchants who trade in misinformation and divisiveness, humanities scholars, educators, and yes, editors and university administrators have an opportunity and a responsibility to support activist awareness-raising projects and help seed informational resilience in our communities. I remain convinced, today more than ever, that coming to grips with the current crisis of democracy and the rise of authoritarianism will require a collective reinvestment in community conversations, dialectical inquiry, public ethics, critical thinking, and political imagination. More humanities, in other words, sharpened for the existential challenges of our time. Thank you. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, David, for that brilliant intervention. Our second speaker, Joan Bartlett, is coming to us from Dublin, Ireland. She's where she's at a conference, and I feel very fortunate that she was willing to take time today to help us out at this in this conversation. Joan is an expert in bioinformatics, information behavior, information interaction, and information literacy. A faculty member in the School of Information Studies as well at the McGill Center for Bioinformatics. She has published and taught extensively on the relation between library research and practices and information and media literacies. Libraries have been at the epicenter of recent and unfortunately largely successful efforts by right-wing cultural warriors to remove and ban books that discuss the importance of colonialism, slavery, indigeneity in North American history. Professor Bartlett's work on these and other related topics will bring vital perspectives to bear on the topic of disinformation from an institutional point of view. Joan?
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay, first of all? Okay. Yeah, so good afternoon from Dublin. Good morning to Montreal. As was mentioned, yeah, my normal job is I'm the director of the School of Information Studies, which is just down the road, not the hill from where you are now, but I am coming to you from Dublin. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm sorry I actually can't be there for the whole 2 days, but I'm very, very glad that I'm able to at least join in for this discussion. My comments, I think, are going to be somewhat narrower in scope than the introduction might have suggested. I think the way this panel is going to go, we're going to end up talking about a lot of different skills or literacies that can help mitigate or help people deal with mis and disinformation. And what I'd like to do with my few minutes here is talk to you about, introduce the concept of information literacy. I think we're going to talk about media and journalism literacy later on. So I just want to put my comments in the context of information literacy. So this is something coming from the field of library and information studies. Has a history going back now about 30 years, and the advent of information literacy and that terminology came about at the same time as information resources tended to become digitized, around the time that the internet became prevalent. And basically the way people looked for information, particularly in an academic context, moved from going physically into a library, interacting with a human being and dealing with physical materials that have been selected, curated, organized, accessed by catalogs or structured databases, to doing this work while on their own in an online environment. And that the issues with that have just exacerbated over the decades since, as more and more information has become available. So the challenge basically became, how do people learn the skills that they previously would not have needed to know because they were dealing with intermediaries who were curating the information, selecting the information, and helping them use it. So there's a lot of definitions out there. The shortest one I've got is information literacy is the abilities that allow people to recognize when information is needed and to locate, evaluate, and use effectively that information. So it's everything from understanding what you need, getting it, and using it. There's various definitions, but they all cover those main three points. Within that context, one of the things that was found to be the biggest challenge, as again, people moved to doing a lot of this work on their own, was not so much the looking for information and searching for information. So people could generally figure out and learn the technology and the search systems relatively straightforwardly. But the big problem was knowing what they wanted in the first place and figuring that out and defining that. And that was noted in the 1990s when this work first started being done. It hasn't really changed. There's a big challenge going from there's something I kind of want to know about in your head, to be able to define that and articulate it, and then enter it into a search system, whether it's typing something into Google, typing something into ChatGPT, asking a person, just making that leap from what is vaguely going on in my head to something that you can express is still very challenging, but very, very, very critical. So that's one part of it. Within the information literacy world, then there have been numerous efforts over, again, last several decades to articulate and the skills, just give examples, to even go to the point of saying, here's the learning outcomes that one should be able to accomplish if one has a set of skills. But they give a nice framework for discussing, what do we really mean when we say information literacy, and what does that encompass? So one of the early set of frameworks that came out was looking through a set of 5 stages or five elements. Knowing how to determine the need, which I mentioned, accessing information efficiently and effectively. So that's searching for information, but key to it is the effective and efficient part of it. Critical evaluation of the sources, and I think that is going to get picked up again, discussing media literacy in particular really focuses on that element of it. So once you've got a source, really critically evaluating whether that's a good source and a reliable source. Using the information effectively. So what do you do with it once you have it? And then a whole bunch of things relating to the ethical, legal, social uses of it. So this could have things such as, citing resources properly and not plagiarizing, respecting copyright, and thinking about resharing information and that type of thing. So that's sort of one perspective on thinking of the skills relating to information literacy. And that perspective that sort of came from the early 2000s, before social media, before the prevalence of all of us as information creators and producers and publishers. So it's more of a consumer-oriented perspective. So bringing things down to the area where we're sharing information, where we're creating information, the perspective again has evolved. And the emphasis, while not discounting all of those skills, also then brings in concepts like understanding authority and how it is constructed and how it's contextual. So understanding how and why you would attribute authority to a particular information creator or not. Also being aware that how authority is defined may marginalize certain groups of people that is problematic. Understanding that information creation is a process, and that process may have motivations behind it. It may have, so thinking about why is somebody creating this information? Why are they putting this information out? Why are they sharing this information? Thinking about how the information product reflects on the content. Understanding that information has value. So that ties in a lot to the ethical use of information. So the citing properly, the not plagiarizing, that type of thing. Understanding that the research process, and more specifically the information search process, are explorations and iterative processes. The questions may evolve as you're searching. and that research involves inquiry. And I think it was mentioned in one of the questions in the keynote that you don't go into or you shouldn't be going into the research process with the answer predetermined and looking for evidence just to support your perspective, but aware that you may be encountering new perspectives, new points of view, different information than what you thought. And then understanding that scholarship is a conversation. So there's an interaction between the producers of information, the scholars, even as an undergrad student writing a paper, you're engaging in that scholarly conversation. So this is the sort of the more contemporary perspective on ways of thinking about information literacy. And I guess my sort of take on or way I'm hoping this contributes to the panel here is just to point this out as here's a framework for well-established frameworks for teaching a set of skills and a set of perspectives that may help people both in the process as they're looking for information to be more purposeful and knowledgeable in where and how they look for information, and hopefully then to be able to separate the mis and disinformation from things that are more reliable, and for people to reflect on their processes of how they go about seeking and looking for information. So it's taking an approach that's more proactive and is more sort of forward-oriented, that you're not, although it would also be applied for information people encounter or information that comes to them, but it's just something as you're going out looking for information, you can have these perspectives in mind. The other thing I'll just sort of throw in, because I think we're going to get into the further discussion about the various skills people would need to learn and where they might be learning these and who can help people learn these skills. We just had the previous comment from David about the need for more humanities and more humanities knowledge and skills. This information literacy has traditionally come from the information professionals, largely from libraries and librarianship, but also it's becoming much more prevalent now in archival settings. But there's a comment I read a few years ago saying that information literacy, should be the work of all librarians and all libraries. I would expand that to say this should be the work and the mandate of all information professionals and all information organizations. And what that means is there's a rich source of people who have expertise both in these skills and in teaching these skills. So I can see one of my colleagues from the Concordia Library on the Zoom. So I could put a shout out to the university librarians. But this is something I think should be coming into schools, into elementary school, into secondary school, into public context, into workplace context. And there's this very rich, knowledgeable resource of folks out there who can help support these skills. I won't say that this is the whole solution to the puzzle, but I think that the skills that come with information literacy provide a really good contribution to the problem of dealing with mis and disinformation, which I think are complemented by the other perspectives we'll be talking about today. So I was told 5 to 10 minutes. I think that's 5-ish. So I will leave it at that and be happy to come back and discuss later questions.
Thanks so much, Joan. The historical trajectory that you described there has reminded me that how much our whole economy and interactions have become self-service, right? The sort of the reduction of interaction with anyone, whether it's at a gas station or a grocery store or a bank, and it just underlines the need, right, for a more social and socially educational, right, approach to this. Our last speaker in this session, Lucie Laumonier, is an assistant professor of journalism here at Concordia University with an MA in history from the Université de Sherbrooke in Quebec and a PhD in history from Université de Sherbrooke and Université Montpellier in France. Her area of research is medieval France, specifically notarial sources, wills, marriage contracts, etc., and judiciary documents from the Parlement de Toulouse, which focuses on families from Languedoc, the south of France, from the 1250s to the end of the 15th century. She's interested in the concepts of crisis, norm, and normality from the perspective of social history, urban or religious. Dr. Laumonier's focus on crisis mentalities in the Middle Ages provides important historical connections and depth to the discussion of myths and disinformation, and also serves as a platform to demonstrate how the overarching theme of the conference can be taught across the curriculum. Lucie?
Thank you very much. So I didn't write this bio. I'm like, oh, interesting. I like your take on what I've been doing.
You're right. I
Yeah.
wrote that myself.
Yeah, so, okay, thank you. Yes, so yes, I'm a medieval historian originally, but I kind of pivoted towards journalism at some point. I'm still writing a lot of medieval research. And so I'm here because I've been teaching a course on fake news, so to speak, and disinformation to a large group of students, 50 plus. And I will talk today and now this morning more about the media literacy side of this class and the things I've been focusing on. And this afternoon I'm in another panel and I will talk about history and the history of fake news. That's this afternoon. I prepared some slides. Oh, yes, so this is for this morning. Well, Dr. Robin already covered the what is disinformation, so I'm not going to dive into this, but I wanted to feature Charlie from It's Always Sunny, because I think it's, the usual picture for like conspirational thinking and fake news. Okay, so the first thing I always start with my students is that it's absolutely not a new phenomenon, and David, you already mentioned that. One of my favorite favorite topic is, all the thinking, the things about children being abducted, used either in sex rings or for organ harvesting, and the origins of this myth that we can find, in rumors. When I grew up in the 90s, we already heard that. It's the Pizzagate thing in the 2000s. We have that also throughout the 19th, 18th, 17th, 16th, 15th, 14th, 13th, 12th centuries, probably the origin of the myth through the blood libel, where Christians accused members of the Jewish community to abduct their children and to take bath of their blood to increase their health. So we can, there is a bunch of false information, disinformation, and conspiracy theories that we can trace back like this through history. And it's also very interesting because it helps, I think, students to see many of the common features, such as racism, misogyny, anxiety towards children, as well as the different types, let's say, of disinformation, propaganda being probably the easiest to document, go back to the ancient world. Something that I also try to discuss with students is the information overload, also a topic that Dr. Robin covered. So the fact that we are overwhelmed by news, and it's a very well documented issue, news fatigue. According to the digital news report by the Reuters Institute, and their Canadian chapter section is researched by le Centre d'études sur les médias de l'Université Laval, and it's over a third of Canadians who at least once a week tune out of the news for various reasons. It can be right now because of the war in Ukraine, or what's happening in the Middle East, or climate change, which is 1/4 of the respondents say that they don't want to hear news about climate change because it's so much anxiety. There is a lot of, I'm not going to dive into that, and I think people in sociology are better equipped to talk about this, but all the people feeling very disenfranchised, left behind, the entire, let's say, incel community, for instance, is really feeling like that. So these people feel left behind. They feel like they're not being heard and seen anymore. I definitely do not share their point of view, but it's still valid because it's how they feel and it's why they're turning to alternative sources of information. So understanding people's attitude toward the media in general is central to better understand and analyze and study disinformation. Confirmation bias is another one that you also mentioned. There have been very interesting studies where people in the US, for instance, who identify with the Republican Party will say CNN is fake news, while people who identify with the Democrat Party will say, well, Fox News is fake news, but they also rate CNN quite high on the fake news spectrum because they are just maybe more critical in general of the media. And finally, we have the huge lack of media literacy. And so that's the topic of the next 5 minutes. So something that I hear all the time, and I just can't hear it anymore, is journalists need to be more objective. Well, guess what? Objectivity is not in journalistic codes of ethics. And I think that's the #1 thing that I just can't hear anymore, and students saying that, journalism students, is very annoying to me. But of course, I approach this topic in a very kind and supportive way, and we walk through all this together. So we talk about why objectivity is not attainable, not at all something that we should desire. It's absolutely impossible. And every morning, people in the newsroom will sit with their editor and they will decide what's going to be in the newspaper today or at the TV, the téléjournal. And so there are choices that are being made all the time. And all these choices are kind of editorial decisions that make objectivity. It's impossible because you're going to hierarchize your news. So instead of objectivity, journalists seek fair coverage and balanced reporting. We can talk about what that means later. But yet, all the time, people talk about objectivity. And I was teaching a very interesting class this winter on kind of multimedia journalism. And it's, younger students, just young students, Gen Z students, and we were talking about social media, people who create news, and why these people are more liked than others. And something that was constantly coming up was the fact that they seemed objective. And even students have a hard time defining what that means for them. But yeah, it's something that I think we all need to think about with them. So instead of talking, of course, about objectivity, I encourage students to think about the media ecosystem. One of the big ones is who owns the news that you're reading or that you're consuming. Are you reading something that's from Postmedia? Because if it belongs to Postmedia, you have a good chance of having the exact same stories in all freaking newspapers. Here on the left, Vancouver Sun, Calgary Herald, Edmonton Journal, Saskatoon, Star Phoenix, Regina, London Free Press, Montreal Gazette, Ottawa Citizen, and the Winton Star, all writing the same op-ed on how the best choice for Canada is Andrew Scheer. So, and this is just very explainable by the ownership of the media. Second example from Quebec, and we shouldn't assume that people are aware because a lot of people are not aware. So what's happening right now with all the headlines on the Montreal Gazette about people not being able to speak French and Quebec identity being in disarray and we're all going to die because of immigrants. Well, guess what? You have the same thing in Journal de Québec. TVA is running very similar stories. Who owns that? Well, surprise, surprise, it's Pierre-Carl Pelado, who is also M&A for Le Parti Québécois. So we again have here a huge media concentration in Quebec, and it's not like the type of news that they're running, it's not surprising. So that's point #2, knows who owns what, and students are really interested and they feel very engaged when they open conversations like that. Why do you think it's good? Why is it bad? It lowers costs, but what are the political and cultural consequences? So I've seen students really engaged with that particular thing because they feel like they see the secrets. And yes, we put a little tinfoil hat on, but we can have one, I think, when it touches to capitalism. That's my personal take. Something also very important, I think it's my one before last slide, is on the fact that fake news look extremely real when they are produced by news outlets. So there were research, here I'm citing one, where they use all the codes of traditional journalism. So you have opinion writers, you have categories like health, environment, politics. They have shows like the morning show, the evening show. Rebel News does that very, very well. It looks so professional, but the content is really what changes. So it's extremely editorialized. 2/3 of the stories, according to the research, are very like opinion oriented, and more than 2/3 are also extremely trivial. So for instance, they're gonna focus on the murder of someone by a person of color because it's their #1 topic, and then the topic, and it's gonna be about immigration and the dangers. So they're gonna use anecdotes to just steer the conversation in a direction. Likewise, another issue is opinion journalism and the fact that it's not often correctly labeled on websites. Not a lot of people know that when it's written analysis, it means opinion journalism. An op-ed is opinion journalism. Commentary is opinion journalism. And it's much more emotional in nature, and that's what touches people, because like emotions are stronger than facts usually. And it makes catchier headlines more shareable on social media as well. So being able to identify opinion journalism is also something very important with students. I'm sorry, okay, I have a couple of more, but I'm gonna just go super fast. And here, connecting with what Dr. Bartlett was saying about expertise and who are experts, I just want to show you two different think tanks / research groups. And I highly invite you to establish your own think tank or research group if you want, because everybody can do that. We have also, of course, the True North Center for Public Policy, which according to them is independent and apolitical. We know that they are far-right, it's a far-right research center, think tank, you call it whatever, the way you want. They also fund the news outlet True North, and their experts are always invited in the pages of True North, because it's like a circle where you're an expert, you're invited, so it legitimizes your work, and the fact that they invite experts legitimizes True North. So it's a fake news, far-right think tank. My favorite, and it's extremely sad, is the Indian Residential School Research Group, and they do residential school denialism, and saying, attention to the bottom right, revisiting Canada's collective guilt for mass murders that were never committed. And so people who don't really know, they're gonna type, research center, residential school, find them, it looks legit. It's called a research group. About us, it's supposedly scholars or people who've been researching that. And so that's not proper expertise, definitely not. But it's super easy to fake expertise. So who are the experts? It's also something we talk about. Last thing, I just want to bring attention to this. It's quite hilarious. So the Democracy Fund hosts its 3rd annual Student Journalism Conference, and the theme is Disinformation, Fact-Checking and Reporting on Forbidden Subjects. They will learn about Canada's civil liberties challenges in 2024. So I invite students to apply because it's organized by Rebel News True North and the very well-named Democracy Fund. So here we have something that is worth just, I don't know, I think it was perfect when I saw this morning. I felt, especially the topic this year on disinformation and forbidden topics. So yeah, that's it for me. Thank you.
So we have plenty of time for questions and discussion, and so I want to thank the 3 panelists, both for some excellent presentations and for their willingness to go along with this experiment in shorter presentations, so we have longer time for discussion. So I'm going to open the floor to questions, and I don't see any hands up immediately, so maybe I'll start by, or is there a hand back there? No? Okay. I will start by asking Lucie, how do students deal with the fact that journalists are not objective, nor should they be objective? And what sort of activities do you do with your students to work them towards, move them towards a more professional and literate, I guess, understanding of journalism?
Well, I would say that we're very fortunate in Concordia in that I'm definitely preaching to the choir, and students are very progressive. I'm gonna say woke, just because it's more funny. It's funnier. So yeah, they usually are quite progressive, and they very quickly understand, and they listen to each other very respectfully. And this disinformation class, we had the most wonderful conversations on extremely, extremely difficult topics. But I think at first, yeah, so at first they're a bit surprised, but then they very quickly understand why, and they usually stop using the word. But yeah, no, I've been so fortunate because they are really interested, engaged, respectful, and smart.
And what do the projects look like in that class?
What do the project look like? We have a small midterm just to consolidate concepts, approach. They do group presentations because I want them to have fun. So, for instance, on various topics. So one, for instance, that very close to my heart is called, I think, Ancient Alien, Ancient Apocalypse, and the stakes behind history revisionism. So we pick conspiracy theories or fake news, and they tell us why, or what it is, and then what are the underpinnings and how it was built. And they also we do a debunking thing on True North and Rebel News, and they write an essay on the topic of their choice.
Great. Can we get a...
Thank you, everyone, for your wise commentary this morning. David, one of the lines that you said was, before we get students to think outside the box, we need to get students to see the box. And I think a lot about that in my own work with secondary students. And I'm very curious what your perspectives are. How do we get students to see the box?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've received a version of this question from people who are working with students in K through 12 as well. And the premise in that case was that, these are complex issues. How are you going to get, a third grader or fourth grader to kind of take this thing and participate and get, the right lesson out of this? And my standard answer is that, there are certain vices that our educational system, particularly in the States, has promoted. I think you alluded to some of them, including, you first form your opinion and then you look for information that justifies your opinion kind of thing, which is the wrong way to go about it. But there is something else that we are doing that I find a good starting point, which is to find patterns, to be able to identify patterns. And we do this with kids even in kindergarten. I mean, so identifying patterns is one way to actually detect the boxes that structure our thinking at the most basic level. So there is a way in which much of what we do, say, for example, in literary studies, has to do with identifying patterns. One of the reasons I like Cervantes so much is that his writings are all commentary on previous writings. And the way he establishes, he works out this commentary is by identifying patterns in chivalry novels, patterns in pastoral romances, patterns in sentimental poetry, misogynistic patterns, for example, in sentimental poetry, and is looking at the genres and how those genres promote a certain version of the world, is how we can distance ourselves from that image. So we need defamiliarization. But the first step is actually identifying patterns. And the defamiliarization comes later. So that's, to me, that's a way to get into the exercise of getting students to see the box so they can think outside the box.
Thanks. Yes.
Thank you so much, really insightful. I wanted to pose a question to Joan Bartlett, maybe to Lucie as well. I'm sorry, I didn't get your last name. So the question I have to you is, at what point does literacy become education? Do you see any kind of boundary? And the reason I'm asking that is basically I want to know what to say to students in my classes once they say, just Google it. And what comes to mind, something that didn't make it into my book, is Arthur C. Clarke at some point said that any sufficiently advanced technology seems like magic. And that was way back then, right? When did he write the Kubrick scenario for 2001, The Space Odyssey? A while ago, right? So that was around 70s. So I'm wondering, is there a time and place, perhaps if we could start with Joan, in information literacy, where AI literacy, technological awareness has to come in at some point? And the same for media literacy from the point of view of journalism, if you could pick that up.
Okay, first of all, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so I'm getting weird unmute messages as I'm just trying to navigate the Zoom here. Commentary on technological literacy or lack thereof here. Yeah, so probably multi-pronged response to your question, but thank you for the question. I would, and anybody who's been in my class over the years would know that I've argued this extensively, that information literacy should, I think, parallel sort of learning from, maybe not quite from kindergarten, but as soon as people are at the point of starting to do any kind of sort of research or information-based, looking for information and using it in schools. And it should be taught progressively in the same way that reading and math skills and all the other skills are taught progressively. Waiting until people hit university and then starting to try to introduce these concepts is too late. I would also argue that it's just having these skills, having this knowledge should be part and parcel of being an educated, functional human being. And it's not just something for the academic world, it's something that permeates so many aspects of our lives. These should be fundamental skills. You mentioned a number of other ones. I'm sorry, technological literacy, media literacy. I think these are all skills that we need. Coming from a background working with scientific and health information, I think scientific literacy is another place where we need more background knowledge. Like there's a whole bunch of skills and competencies we need just to sort of be functional in society. And you mentioned Google, the just Google it. Knowing where just Googling it fits into the broader scheme. So Google has its place in scholarly research and academic research. It's sort of knowing what it's going to give you, knowing how to use those results, and knowing when it's okay to use Google and when that makes sense, and when you need to go to other sources and when those make sense. And being aware that Google is also, by its ranking, by its attempts to personalize the results, it is bolstering the filter bubble. You're going to get more things that look like what you've seen before. You're going to see more things that people like you have linked to. So people do need to know that those results, top results you get from Google, are not because that's necessarily the best, most reliable source to answer, to address whatever question was asked. It's based on the ranking. So I think those are really important things to be aware of. Did I get all your parts of your question there?
Yes, we're getting a thumbs up, so.
Yeah.
Yes, and to bounce on what Joan was saying, I think, and we all agree here, and I think it's been already said, it all boils down to critical thinking, critical analysis. And it's all part of the same topic, being able to discriminate information, understand where it's coming from, how it was done, why it's potentially relevant or not. And I think it's a collective effort from kindergarten to higher education. I try, when possible, to address the topic with students, just, going back to how do you find relevant, accurate sources on the internet, because even sometimes third-year students won't. Even if you ask students, okay, I only want scholarly sources for this, they will not, because it's not it's not always the fastest route for them. And I don't want to seem like I'm blaming them, we all make mistakes. It's definitely something, for me it's a collective social responsibility. And I'm seeing my kid, sometimes we watch animal videos on Instagram, secret, and she will say, is it real or is it a false one? Age 8, she understands that, but sometimes she will also say, well, you can just ask your phone. But it's not like God. It's something that we're going to be working on, but I think it's a collective responsibility. Still, university level, we still need to help and support our students with that.
Can I make another sort of quick comment on that? I think maybe it's one thing I'd like to add is part of the skills that people need to learn as well, as you say, talking about evaluating sources, choosing the sources, but it's also knowing what question to ask. Yeah. And when people go into that process of looking for information, really reflecting and knowing what is the question. And having the skills to be able to develop that. And I also just really quickly want to comment on the ease of use of so many of these sources now. And going back again, in my field, through the history of information seeking, going back pre-internet, pre-electronic sources, we look for the factors people prioritize in where they choose to get their information. Fast, free, easy. Yeah. Consistently going back, 60 years of literature, fast, free, and easy. It's we're always going to be working against that tendency, which just the human nature. We want things fast and easy and free. So sort of trying to give people reasons why they should move beyond that is really important, I think.
Yeah, if I may, that's something I would like to underscore. That I think teaching students to take time to ask better questions is fundamental in this process. And sometimes it's something we overlook because of the pressure to produce, to spew right away written work or whatever, And I really try to emphasize that in my classes, that don't think that you're wasting your time because you're taking time to ask questions. That's part of that stop and think kind of exercise. The other thing that when I think it was Victoria who mentioned magic, how any advanced technology can look like magic, made me think of how the way magic works involves sleight of hand. The sleight of hand is to steal your attention to a place where the trick is not taking place. And that is how that is a pattern in how disinformation works. Is look over there at the shiny object. That's where the real issue is taking place. They are distracting you. But in reality, that's just a projection. What they are doing is precisely the opposite. Is having your gaze locked up on the wrong object, so that whatever is taking place over here is unseen. So again, that's another way in which we can disturb the flow of this information, and another way in which we are urged to look outside the box, because the box is what fixes your sight on the wrong object in this type of world. And this information in this sense is not unique. Something else that is important, I think, to recognize is that this information cannot be treated in isolation. This information is native to our media environment. It's native to our market economy. Disinformation is a for-profit business. Disinformation works in the capitalist structure because it provides cash to the disinformers, among other benefits. So we can't dissociate disinformation from, say, your basic, the basic structure of a commercial, which is manipulative speech per excellence. So again, talking to our students about how a commercial works. What are the basic elements of a commercial? Step 1, step 2, step 3. Step 1, you're too fat to think. You can't get, the object of your desire the way you look. So you need this, whatever it is, product to get you the chick. And then they show somebody who actually bought the product and got the chick. Though it's a better world now. This step 1, step 2, step 3 is something that works for this information, but it also works for the basic structure of commercials. We have been at the Center for Information Integrity, some of the teaching modules that we are struggling with are modules where we try to get older adults to recognize snake oil scams. And what's complicating our ability to create the model, to make the model, is that it works just about the same as the way pharmaceutical companies advertise their products. So it's the thin line between, say, snake oil scams and pharmaceutical advertising makes it particularly complicated.
Are there any more questions? Yes, Elena, can we get a microphone?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all the conversation and all of the presenters. Thank you. Lucie, I was really curious to hear, you mentioned that your students have ideas about what objectivity is, but that they all have different ideas. I was curious to hear more about that and just sort of how they think about like what objectivity is or what their expectations of journalists' objectivity are.
Yes, so usually it's really, they just think that it's possible to report on the facts. And so they think that, it's now like a philosophy question, but that it's possible to just tell things the way they are. And then I present them with a story that I invent, and we decide how to report on that. And then they realize that it's not really possible to be purely objective, just the choice of word. Did a policeman kill someone, or was the person killed by? And then it's their fault because of the use of the passive voice. Should we mention the color of a person, their ethnicity, or their gender in a story? How does that gonna impact things? What is the order of facts? What information should we leave out? Or how do we hierarchize information? And so just a very simple, let's report on this fake story that's politically charged, because then I tend to create a fake story that's politically charged. They understand better, or we can say, okay, so you are presented with all these stories that came through wire services, and you have 200 stories this morning. Which one are you going to report because you only have 20 slots? Is it because in Canada we should report on Canada? Why is this war more important than this one? And then they understand that it's not possible to just report on facts. Yeah.
That brings in another question that I have, and since we have a heavy humanistic presence on this panel, we've talked about lies, deception, fakes, disinformation, but the term fiction has not come into the conversation yet, right? And so I'm wondering, how fiction can be used or not be used. And I know you've written on this, David, but and what you've just discussed here is a fictional, right? It's a fictional journalistic story, and so I'm wondering, as a humanist myself, how do we bring fiction in to help us out with disinformation and misinformation.
All right, I can take a first crack at it. So I think fiction can be a very valuable tool. It allows us to be invested emotionally into the fate of characters whom we know not to be real. So the difference between, say, fiction and lies is that in lies, we are provided the idea explicitly or implicitly that this is real. While in fiction, the original contract between the author and the reader is this is not real, right? So it doesn't have the same manipulative potential as lies, at least if we follow the contract. Instead, we can identify, emote, feel emotions within this game that's fiction, and we can discover things about the world through the eyes of these characters that we have bought into for the sake of the game. But there is always that distance. This is a game. The danger is when fiction is presented as reality. But that typically is not how fiction introduces itself to the world, right? That's why it's called fiction. Lucie, do you have more thoughts on this?
The only thing I can say is that journalism has been a lot inspired by a lot of works of fiction, especially since the 70s and the creation of new journalism. So, first-person perspective, emotions, details, setting the scene, longer features that are personal stories, because it's what works and what reels people in. And then we can find a lot of these literary devices in a lot of fake news, because again, emotions are stronger than facts, unfortunately, or that data, I guess. Yeah.
I think this is another place where Cervantes provides so many lessons in a work like Don Quixote, where you have the protagonist basically is trying to force everyone around him to participate in this fiction, while those around him are understanding that it is fiction, and yet he's a real person. And so you've got different levels of reality in the same work, right? And some of them feel more real to us, and some of them definitely taste more fictional. But in learning how to negotiate and understand how the different levels of fiction and are working, some more fantastical than others, and you may become aware at some point that this character seems more real to me, but in the end, the narrator comes in at some point and says, well, that's also a fictional character as well, right? And at that point, you realize you're in a world of different levels of fiction, and you're going to have to learn how to negotiate. It's like lessons in fictional structuralism or something like that, or lessons in identifying the different kinds of boxes, the many different kinds of boxes, as David was pointing out.
I find it particularly helpful to read Don Quixote in parallel with conspiracy theories, and to show the circularity of conspiracy theories. When Don Quixote encounters the windmills, he always finds explanations for what happens. The enchanter that has it for me has changed these giants into windmills to take away from me the glory of their defeat. I mean, this is the kind of thing that happens all the time in conspiracy theories. Whenever the theory encounters an obstacle, all they need to do is find another rationalization and just keep moving the ball forward that way. Don Quixote is the perfect conspiracy theorist.
It's true. And I have one last question for Joan. I'm wondering what your students are finding the most challenging about negotiating information literacy right now.
Good question. I should point out that my students are those in the Master of Information Studies program, so they're all students who are in the process of their education to become information professionals. So within this context, I think there's you know, a bit of sort of preaching to the choir. So what I'm teaching them, focusing more on is helping them learn the skills that they're going to need to go out and teach these skills to others. So for themselves, our entire program basically is building these skills. So by the time they get to my class, they're already quite solid in them. But I think in terms of them reflecting on how they're going to help people teach the skills, it's like some of the challenges that we've already brought up today. So, you know, countering mis and disinformation, and just the fact that I think the challenges are increasing as we move forward. There's more and more things to sort of mitigate against. And we've talked a lot about, you know, how do you reach somebody whose perspective is so fixed in you know, with respect to example for a particular conspiracy theory. Over the past few years, we've talked a lot about COVID. So the ones who are really, really solid anti-vaxxers, how do you reach somebody like that to help them learn that the place where they're getting their information is not the most reliable source in the world. So that's one of the challenges people are concerned about. And I think maybe the acknowledgement that maybe we can't reach everybody with the education processes we have. We can try to reach as many as we can, but we may not be able to. If somebody's very, very entrenched in a position, this may be insufficient to help get them out of that space. So that's some of the things we've talked about. And I think also just the number of skills, you know, that it's not 30 years ago, it might be sufficient to say, here's how you search a database, you know, done. But there's so many more skills, not just the information skills, but the media skills, understanding how journalism works. I think the comments about journalistic objectivity probably say similar things for information professionals. You know, it's not a completely neutral stance. Although it, you know, values balance and fairness and transparency and so on. I'm sorry, jet lag just caught up with me and I lost the train of my thoughts. So
No worries. I was saying
my flight touched down at like 4:45 in Dublin yesterday morning. So it was a very, very long day and I'm still a bit shell-shocked on that. I apologize.
You're doing amazing, right? So I was thinking actually you're focusing on like this moment of intransigent, you know, the intransigent climate denier, the intransigent anti-vaxxer. It really it's a nice place, sort of. Although I'm going to open up the Victoria had her hand up again, but it will make those observations make a nice segue to what our first panel in the afternoon is going to talk about, which is the relationship between disinformation and extremism. And so it's going to make a nice bridge. But we have a question from, we got the microphone.
Just a side comment that I feel like I've been reading the wrong kind of literature for the last 10 to 15 years. David, you're inspiring me to reread Don Quixote as opposed to Uber Butler, who has created the best garden shed on TripAdvisory over the 9 months of his false advertising and fake commentary. So thank you so much for the comment on the fiction. I will be looking at that a lot more.
All I can say as a fellow Cervantes scholar is mission accomplished. So anyway, I think we'll close for the morning. Thanks again, David, Lucie, and Joan for a great session and for your participation here as well. And thanks to the Fourth Space team. And we will start this up again at what time?
We're back at 1:15.
1:15. All right. 2:15.
Oh, yeah.
Is it 2:15?
We'll have a huddle and get back to you.
Yeah, I think it's 2:15. Anyway, bon appetit. Thank you.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks to you joining us in the space, and of course, those of you online as well. We're going to be closing up the live stream, but Zoom will stay open. So well, I'll make a little announcement to clarify that time for those of you on Zoom. And don't forget...